Welcome to True Crime Boss. I'm your host, Jarrett Ferrantino, and wherever we go, everyone is talking about the Kohberger prosecution. We're reading the tea leaves, trying to take apart where his defense is headed. And for those of you that have been living under a rock since last November, Bryan Kohberger is the suspect and the defendant charged with killing of those four beautiful young Idaho students. And he is awaiting trial in Idaho. The prosecution has filed notice of their intent to seek the death penalty, and Bryan Kohberger's life now hangs in the balance. There have been some significant developments in the case over the past several weeks. We're in the stage of the trial where you're going to see pretrial motions. And pretrial motions are essentially the prosecution and the defense try to hammer out as best they can what is going to be allowed in the upcoming trial, what's going to be kept out. Also, one of the major issues that's addressed in pretrial motions is time. And everyone is talking about Bryan Kohberger's waiver of the speedy trial rule. What does that mean? Does that mean he's waived his right to have a fast trial, like a trial at 2 times speed? Or does it mean he has waived his right to have a trial within 6 months in Idaho? Essentially, here's what it means. The speedy trial rule means a prosecution has charged you with a very serious crime, and they have 6 months from that charging to bring you to trial and have you answer for that crime. That is a right that belongs to a criminal defendant. Think about it practically. You've been accused of a crime, and the DA has 6 months to put up or shut up. You basically say, hey, Mr. DA, you've charged me, you've charged my loved one with a crime. You can't just let us sit in jail in the United States of America and just keep putting off the trial. At some point, you have to put on witnesses, put on evidence, and allow me to test that right and test that trial. That's what the speedy trial rule is. It means people cannot wait indefinitely to go to trial. Some places it's a year. Some places it's 6 months. In Idaho, it's 6 months. That is a right that belongs to Bryan Kohberger, as we said. However, Bryan Kohberger can delay a trial. And then you may think, why would an innocent man who claims to be innocent want to delay his or her trial? Here's why. Because the Kohberger investigation in Idaho was a large investigation. We all know it involves DNA, cell phone data, a brutal crime scene, a forensic service examination of that crime scene. It went from Idaho to Washington State to northeastern Pennsylvania to the Pocono Mountains. So you have a multi-jurisdictional crime scene and multi-state warrants that were served in the case. When you have a team of investigators working on a particular case, they have the advantage of numbers and not unlimited resources, but certainly larger resources than a criminal defendant. Now, Mr. Kohberger and his attorneys have to prepare their defense. And what's going on in the Kohberger defense right now, you may ask. Number one, they're going to look at the DNA evidence. They're going to have their own experts test the DNA. They're going to review the lab information for the individuals that tested the DNA in this case. That's one facet of what this team has to do. Good luck trying to get that done inside of 6 months, folks. These things take time. Everything in the law is 30 days. 30 days to do this, 30 days to do that. I promise you that testing takes time. That testing then has to be digested by the defense. It has to be fit in to their defense. In addition to that, the cell phone data. One cell phone can produce thousands of pages of information, folks. Your cell phone, my cell phone, maintains a tremendous amount of information. Dumping that on from a prosecution to a defense team is a voluminous amount of material. These things take time. You're not going to be able to get all that stuff done within the 6 months. So Bryan Kohberger's team has said, hey, Mr. DA, you don't need to bring us to trial in 6 months. We're waiving that right that belongs to us. We know we have a right to bring Bryan's trial forward in 6 months. We're saying you don't have to bring the charges or the trial within 6 months. Now, you have to understand, if Kohberger didn't do that and the DA failed to bring those charges forward, they could be dismissed. They could be dismissed. But this delay has been occasioned by the defense, so they get more time. Bryan Kohberger, there was a lot of talk about his not speaking at his arraignment, if you remember, that his attorney said not guilty on his behalf. The judge wasn't having that for the Rule 600 waiver. Mr. Kohberger had to appear personally in court and waive that right to a speedy trial because it is such an important right. And it is so important that the judge asks Mr. Kohberger, sir, you realize by doing this, you will not go to trial in 6 months' time. Yes, you're doing this voluntarily. Yes, you're doing this with the full understanding that it could take up to a year to get back here and go to trial. He says yes. I've had the opportunity to discuss this on Good Morning America, the Rule 600 waiver and the speedy trial waiver. And you never really get into all of the intricate aspects of what's going on with that waiver and what would motivate Bryan Kohberger's team to make that waiver. So that hearing took place, Kohberger appeared, and he acknowledged that's what they're doing. In addition to not going to trial in 6 months, folks, that means this trial will not likely happen until late 2024 at best. And people seem shocked by that. People seem surprised. These things don't happen quickly, folks. There is so much to do, and there is so much litigation until a jury is seated, especially in a case of this magnitude. I've had cases with this type of evidence. I'm very familiar about the time associated on both sides to go through it. Here's the thing. Many of you out there may not have a lot of sympathy for Bryan Kohberger, and believe me, I understand it. But at the same time, we cannot force him to a quick trial by counsel or attorneys that aren't prepared and then expect that case to stand the rigors of an appeal. He has to be given proper defense. It's the United States of America. We are presumed innocent, and they have to have the time to build their defense. And that's exactly what they're doing. Some people may not like that. I'm telling you, it's the greatest system in the world, and we have to let it play out. And that's why Kohberger is waiving that time. And families, and I've had these conversations where I have to tell a family the trial is off for 6 months. The trial may be off for a year. Bryan Kohberger is sitting in his jail cell. He's not going anywhere. Also, it doesn't mean we're not going to hear from the defense for the next 6 months or a year. Trust me, there's going to be a lot of fireworks out of Idaho over the next 6 months to a year. Right now, there are a lot of pending pretrial motions, and we're going to break these pretrial motions down as they come in. There's two in particular that are out there right now. One, as I alluded to before, Bryan Kohberger's defense team is asking for what we refer to in the business as DNA lab notes, okay? And they're right to do this. This is a pretty boilerplate request. However, the nature of the request is pretty broad. They're looking for the information from the lab that tested Bryan Kohberger's DNA. And we all know that there was a DNA submission made and a search done on one of the Ancestry.com or 23andMe services that allowed for the identification of a member of Bryan Kohberger's family. So there is a lot of requests from the defense about how that process was done. And here's some of the questions they're asking. The laboratories that conducted these requests, have you had any mismatches over the past 6 months? Have you had any breaches of protocol over the past year? Not just in Kohberger's case, at all. Now, that's a pretty broad request, folks. And as a DA, you'd come in and say, look, this is crazy. They want a year's worth of data from this lab. And the defense is going to say, hey, my client's life is on the line here based on this DNA match. Okay, so I would expect the judge is going to come down somewhere in between, asking for the relevant lab information, which, again, I've said in the past, give the defense this stuff. If you have nothing to hide and you want to stand behind the DNA identification that was made from the DNA that was found on the knife sheath, then by all means allow for access to that lab information. However, it's not going to be an investigation into every sample this lab has ever processed in their career. That's outrageous, and it's a bridge too far as I'm concerned, and I think a judge has to know where to cut it off at some point. The other thing that you're going to hear about is a pretrial motion related to the grand jury process that was used to bring the charges against Kohberger. A grand jury was seated. Instead of having a preliminary hearing, one side, the prosecution, appeared before a jury, essentially, presented the information they had, and that jury said, based on the information we've heard, Bryan Kohberger, his case should move forward on the charges of homicide of the 4 young people in Idaho. There are defense challenges to the procedural issues with the grand jury. Now, here's the nature of some of them. The questionnaires the jurors filled out were incorrectly filled out. There were some blank spaces left. There are some grand jury instances and questionnaires that weren't signed properly. These are procedural challenges. I don't fault the defense for making these. They're doing their job. But really, sometimes you got to be careful what you ask for. We talked about if the speedy trial rule wasn't complied with, Kohberger's case could be dismissed. If the grand jury process wasn't followed, you just seat another grand jury, and by all means, they'd reindict Bryan Kohberger. So I don't know where the defense feels like they're going with this. I do think that the prosecution will be successful in combating those grand jury challenges. But we will continue to monitor what's going on in Idaho. Look forward to joining our friends Nancy Grace and the folks at ABC to continue to discuss these things as well. And we'll stay on top of this thing. Thanks for watching True Crime Boss. I'm Jarrett Ferrantino.